I'm Marilyn, 28, and I've been carrying this story with me for far too long. It's about the darkest period of my life, a time when I felt trapped and helpless. I worked as a marketing specialist in a large corporation, surrounded by people who seemed to have it all together. On the surface, everything looked perfect. The sleek office building, the fancy company events, the smiling faces. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. My boss, who had always seemed friendly and supportive, revealed a side of himself that I could never have imagined. He started making demands, pushing me to do things that didn't feel right, and threatening me when I resisted. I felt like I was walking on thin ice, never knowing when he'd blow up or make some new outrageous request. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just my imagination or that I was being too sensitive. But as time went on, I realized that something was very wrong, and that's when the real nightmare began. I started to feel like I was losing myself, like I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of fear and anxiety. But I refused to give up. I knew I had to fight back, no matter what it took. And that's exactly what I did. I worked late nights, just trying to get ahead. My boss would often call me into his office, supposedly to discuss my projects. But sometimes those conversations took a strange turn. He'd make comments about my personal life or ask about things that had nothing to do with work. One evening, he asked me to stay late and discuss a new opportunity. As we talked, he leaned back in his chair, looking way too comfortable. That's when I noticed the photos on his desk. They were innocent enough, just pictures of us from the company picnic. But something about the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. "You're really going places, aren't you?" he said, his voice low and smooth. I nodded, unsure where he was going with this. "I think you could go even further," he continued, with the right motivation. The next day, I received a strange message. "Meet me at the usual place at 5 p.m. Come alone." It was from an unknown number, but I knew it was him. My heart racing, I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but deep down, I knew. At 5 p.m. sharp, I walked into the coffee shop he specified. He was already there, sipping on a cup of coffee. "You know, I've been thinking," he said, his eyes locked onto mine. "You're really talented, but talent only takes you so far. You need connections, and I'm willing to be your connection, for a price." That's when he slid a small folder across the table. Inside were photos. Photos of me at work, at the gym, walking home. Some were taken from far away, others right outside my apartment. I felt a chill run down my spine. "You see, I have a lot of influence," he said, his voice dripping with confidence. "And I'm willing to use it to help you, if you're willing to help me." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with expectation. "I think we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement." I knew right then that my life was about to change forever. The question was, how much would I have to give up? I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about my boss's behavior. The way he would look at me, the way he would speak to me, it all seemed calculated. I started to dig deeper, trying to find out more about him. And then, I stumbled upon a news article that made my blood run cold. It was about a former employee who had accused him of harassment. The article mentioned a settlement, but what caught my attention was the name of the employee, Sarah Jenkins. I decided to reach out to her, hoping she might be willing to talk. After some searching, I managed to find her contact information and sent her a message. To my surprise, she agreed to meet with me. We met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Sarah looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if she feared being watched. "I'm only telling you this because I want to warn you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's ruthless. He'll stop at nothing to get what he wants." She paused, collecting her thoughts before continuing. "I was young and ambitious, just like you. He promised me opportunities, mentorship, and guidance. But it was all a lie. He used me for his own gain, and when I tried to leave, he threatened me. I listened, my mind racing with questions. How many others had there been? How many women had he hurt? Sarah's words painted a picture of a man who was capable of anything, and I realized that I was trapped in a situation that was far more complex than I had initially thought. The more I learned about my boss, the more I realized that I had to get out. But how? I tried to focus on my work, but it was impossible. Every time I saw my boss, I felt a knot in my stomach. I started to doubt myself, wondering if I was overreacting. Maybe I was just being too sensitive, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I began to document everything, keeping a record of all the interactions with my boss that made me uncomfortable. I thought that if I had proof, I could confront him or go to HR. But every time I tried to gather evidence, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. I was afraid of being caught, afraid of retaliation. My colleagues seemed oblivious to the situation, or maybe they just didn't want to get involved. I felt isolated, like I was the only one who saw the truth. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Was I just being paranoid? I knew I needed support, but I didn't know who to turn to. My friends and family would ask me what's wrong, but I couldn't explain it without sounding crazy. I felt trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. One day, I received an email from my boss asking me to meet with him in his office. The email was brief, but it sent a chill down my spine. I knew I had to be careful, but I didn't know what to expect. I took a deep breath and headed to his office, trying to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. As I walked in, he looked up from his computer and smiled. "Come in, have a seat," he said, his voice friendly. But I knew better. I knew that nothing about this situation was friendly. I started to notice that I wasn't the only one who seemed uneasy around our boss. There were others in the office who would glance nervously at him or quickly look away when he approached. I began to wonder if they were experiencing the same thing I was. One coworker in particular, Rachel, caught my attention. She was quiet and reserved, but I had seen her arguing with the boss on several occasions. I decided to approach her one day at lunch. "Hey Rachel, can I talk to you for a minute?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked up from her phone, slightly wary. "What's up?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I just wanted to ask if everything is okay," I said, trying to gauge her reaction. Rachel leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "To be honest, I'm getting really tired of his games," she said. "He's always making demands, pushing us to do more and more. I feel like I'm burning out." I nodded, sensing that there was more to the story. "Has he ever made you feel uncomfortable?" I asked, choosing my words carefully. Rachel's expression changed, and she glanced around the room nervously. "Let's just say I've learned to avoid him as much as possible," she said. I realized that Rachel was likely being manipulated by the boss just like I was. And then she mentioned another coworker, Alex, who had recently left the company under mysterious circumstances. "I don't know what happened to Alex, but I know she was really stressed out before she left," Rachel said. I made a mental note to look into Alex's departure, wondering if it was connected to the boss's behavior. As we parted ways, Rachel gave me a knowing look. "Be careful around him," she warned. I nodded, feeling a sense of solidarity with my coworkers. We were all in this together, and maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to expose the truth. I started to notice that my boss had an unusual amount of influence over everyone's lives. He seemed to know everything about us, from our work projects to our personal relationships. I began to feel like I was being watched, like he had eyes and ears everywhere. One day, I overheard him talking to one of my coworkers, discussing her plans for the weekend. He was friendly and charming, but there was something beneath the surface that made my skin crawl. As I watched, he leaned in close, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Remember, I need that report on my desk by Monday morning," he said, his eyes locked onto hers. She nodded nervously, and I could sense the fear behind her eyes. I realized that my boss's control wasn't just about work, it was about manipulating people's lives. He was using his power to get what he wanted, no matter the cost. I started to feel like I was trapped in a web of his making, with no way out. Every move I made, every decision I took, seemed to be monitored and controlled. I began to wonder if anyone was immune to his influence. Was there anyone in the company who didn't fear him? I knew I had to be careful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was running out of time. The boss's grip was tightening, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I saw him talking to one of the interns. She looked young and vulnerable, and I could sense the unease in her body language. He was laughing and joking with her, but I knew better. I knew that beneath the surface he was calculating, manipulating, and controlling. And I knew that I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I was digging through some old files on my computer when I stumbled upon a strange document. It was a memo, marked confidential, and addressed to my boss. As I scanned the contents, my eyes widened in shock. The memo outlined a plan to use company resources to further the boss's personal interests, including manipulating employee records and suppressing any potential whistleblowers. But what really caught my attention was the mention of a specific project, codenamed Eclipse. According to the memo, Eclipse was a secret initiative aimed at exploiting company data for the boss's personal gain. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the extent of his corruption. This wasn't just about harassment or manipulation, it was about something much bigger. Suddenly, my computer screen flickered and a message appeared. "Delete the file and meet me in my office at 5 p.m. It was from my boss. My heart racing, I quickly deleted the file, wondering how he knew I had accessed it. But I knew I couldn't just delete the file and pretend I hadn't seen anything. I had to do something. But what? As I sat there, frozen in uncertainty, the clock ticked closer to 5 p.m. I knew I had to go to his office, but I had no idea what would happen when I got there. Would I be able to keep my cool, or would he figure out that I knew his secret? The uncertainty hung over me like a shadow, and I knew that my next move would determine the course of everything. I stood up, took a deep breath, and headed to his office. Unsure of what lay ahead, I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure where to start. I began by documenting everything, saving emails and messages, and noting down dates and times of incidents. I also started to observe my boss's behavior more closely, looking for patterns or inconsistencies in his story. I realized that I needed concrete evidence to take to HR or higher management, something that would prove his wrongdoing beyond a doubt. I started to dig deeper, searching for any discrepancies in company records or financial reports that could indicate wrongdoing. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to expose him. I spent long hours poring over documents, making notes, and looking for connections. As I worked, I felt a sense of purpose growing inside me. I was no longer just a victim. I was taking control. One night, I received a message from an unknown number. "Be careful," it said. "He has eyes everywhere." I knew it was a warning, but from whom? Was it a colleague trying to help me or someone trying to scare me off? I decided to ignore it and keep moving forward. I had to gather more evidence, and fast. I started to notice that my boss was getting more aggressive, pushing me to meet impossible deadlines and questioning my every move. I knew he was trying to intimidate me, but I refused to back down. I kept documenting, kept observing, and kept searching for evidence. And then, one night, I stumbled upon something big. A discrepancy in the company's financial records that pointed to a much larger scheme. I knew I had him right where I wanted him, but as I sat there staring at the evidence on my screen, I realized that I wasn't safe. Not yet. I had to get the evidence to someone who could help me, someone who could protect me. But who? I knew I had to be careful. That one misstep could ruin everything. I started to gather more evidence, but it wasn't easy. The company's security systems were robust, and I had to navigate through layers of firewalls and access controls to get to the information I needed. I worked late nights, using my own computer and encrypted channels to cover my tracks. But every time I thought I had made progress, I'd hit a roadblock. Files would be deleted, or I'd find that someone had accessed the system and knew what I was looking for. I tried to reach out to colleagues to see if they had noticed anything suspicious, but no one seemed willing to talk. Either they were loyal to the boss, or they were too afraid to get involved. I felt like I was on my own, like I was the only one who saw the truth. I started to doubt myself, wondering if I was chasing shadows. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. But every time I looked at the evidence, I knew I was right. One night, I received a visit from a colleague, someone I had considered a friend. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. "You're playing with fire. If he finds out, he'll destroy you." I looked at her, trying to gauge her loyalty. "What do you know?" I asked. She hesitated, glancing around the room nervously. "I know enough to warn you. Stop digging, or you'll get hurt." And with that, she left, leaving me with more questions than answers. Was she trying to help me, or was she a messenger for the boss? I didn't know, but I knew I had to keep going. I had to build my case, no matter the cost. I scheduled a meeting with the HR representative, determined to present my evidence and bring the boss to justice. As I sat outside her office, I went over my notes one last time, making sure I had all the facts straight. When she called me in, I took a deep breath and began my story. I laid out the evidence, document by document, showing her the discrepancies and the manipulation. She listened attentively, her expression growing more serious with each passing minute. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "Thank you for coming forward," she said. "I'll need to review this further, but this is clearly a serious matter." I felt a surge of hope, thinking that maybe, just maybe, I would finally get justice. But just as I was about to leave, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. "You're making a big mistake," the voice said. "You shouldn't have gone to HR." My heart sank. How did he know? I looked up to see the HR representative's expression had changed. She was no longer sympathetic, but instead, she seemed concerned. "I think we need to take a closer look at this," she said, her voice measured. "But in the meantime, let's keep this confidential." I realized then that she might be in his pocket too. My heart racing, I knew I had to act fast. I stood up, determination burning within me. "I'll make sure everyone knows the truth," I said, looking her straight in the eye. But as I turned to leave, I wondered, had I just sealed my own fate? I stood outside his office, my heart pounding in my chest. I had the evidence, and I was ready to confront him. I took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and walked in. He looked up from his desk, a hint of surprise on his face. "You wanted to see me?" I asked, my voice firm. He nodded, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. I sat down, my eyes locked on his. "I think you know why I'm here," I said, pulling out the folder filled with evidence. He raised an eyebrow, his expression curious. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," he said, but I could see the flicker of concern in his eyes. I smiled, a cold smile. "Don't play games with me," I said, opening the folder and pulling out the documents. "I have proof of your manipulation, your coercion, and your corruption." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "What makes you think anyone will believe you?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. I leaned forward, my voice low and deadly. Because I have evidence, I said, spreading the documents out on his desk. And I'm not the only one who knows what's going on. He glanced at the documents, his face paling slightly. For a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of fear in his eyes, but then his mask slipped back into place. You'll never be able to prove anything, he sneered. And even if you could, do you really think anyone would care? I stood up, my eyes blazing. We'll see about that, I said, turning to leave. But as I reached the door, I heard his voice, low and menacing. You shouldn't have done this, he said. Now you're in real trouble. I walked out of his office, unsure of what would happen next. Had I done enough to bring him down, or would he find a way to silence me? I knew I had to be careful. That one wrong move could mean disaster. I made my way back to my desk, my mind racing with possibilities. As I sat down, I noticed my phone buzzing. It was a text from an unknown number. You're in danger. Meet me at the usual place at 5 p.m. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Who was sending these messages, and what did they want? I looked around the office, wondering if anyone was watching me. At 5 p.m., I made my way to the designated meeting spot, a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. As I walked in, I saw a figure in the corner, hood up and face obscured. Who are you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure stood up, pulling back its hood. It was a colleague, someone I had trusted. I've been watching you, they said. I know what you're going through. We need to get you out of there before it's too late. I stared at them, unsure of what to believe. Was this a trap or a genuine offer of help? What do you mean? I asked, my heart racing. We can get you protection, a safe way out, they said, but you have to trust me. I hesitated, weighing my options. Could I trust this person, or would they betray me? The outcome hung in the balance, uncertain and precarious. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. I decided to trust my colleague, and we began to make plans for my exit. But just as we were finalizing the details, my phone buzzed again. It was a news alert, and the headline made my blood run cold. Respected businessman accused of wrongdoing found dead. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. The news article mentioned that the police were investigating, but it seemed like a clear case of suicide. I looked up at my colleague, who was watching me with a mixture of shock and concern. It's him, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The boss. My colleague's expression changed, and for a moment, I saw something there that looked like fear. What does this mean? I asked, my mind racing with implications. My colleague hesitated before speaking. This changes everything, they said. We can't trust anyone. We have to be careful. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a group of suits walked in. We're with HR, one of them said. You're being called in for questioning regarding the allegations against your boss. My colleague grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the suits. Go now, they whispered. We'll handle this. I didn't hesitate, grabbing my things and following my colleague out the door. But as we emerged into the bright sunlight, I realized that my life was about to change forever. The question was, in what way? I sat in the conference room, surrounded by HR representatives and senior management. My colleague stood beside me, a steady presence. We presented our evidence, document by document, and the room fell silent. The gravity of the situation sank in, and the atmosphere shifted. One of the suits spoke up, her voice firm. We will launch a full investigation into these allegations. In the meantime, the accused will be placed on administrative leave. The room erupted into a flurry of activity as the executives began discussing the next steps. I felt a sense of vindication, knowing that my efforts had brought about this outcome. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation unfolded. More victims came forward, sharing their stories. The evidence mounted, and the accused's position became increasingly untenable. Finally, the verdict came. The CEO stepped down, and a new leadership team took over. The company began to rebuild, implementing new policies and procedures to prevent similar incidents in the future. As I looked around the office, I saw a sense of relief and hope. Colleagues who had been affected by the accused's actions were finally able to find closure. I knew that I had played a part in bringing about this change, and that gave me a sense of pride and satisfaction. The door opened, and the new CEO walked in. "Thank you," she said, looking at me and my colleague. "Your bravery and determination have brought about a new era for this company. We're committed to making things right." I nodded, feeling a sense of closure. The conflict had been resolved, and justice had been served. The boss's true nature had been exposed, and he would face the consequences of his actions. I sat in my new office, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The past few months had been a roller coaster, but I had emerged stronger and wiser. I thought about the lessons I had learned, the importance of standing up for what I believed in, even when it was hard, and the value of seeking help when I needed it. As I looked out the window, I realized that I had grown in ways I never thought possible. I had discovered a strength and resilience within myself that I didn't know I had. I had also learned the value of allies and support systems, and how they could make all the difference in times of need. I thought about the colleagues who had stood by me, who had believed in me even when I doubted myself. I thought about the new CEO, who had taken bold steps to transform the company culture. And I thought about the journey ahead, the challenges and opportunities that lay in store. I stood up, feeling a sense of purpose and direction. I knew that I would face new challenges, but I was ready. I had learned from my experiences, and I was determined to use those lessons to make a positive impact. I walked out of my office, ready to take on whatever came next. The journey had been long and arduous, but in the end, justice had prevailed. The boss's actions had been exposed, and he had faced the consequences. The company was rebuilding, and a new era of transparency and accountability had begun. As I looked back on the events that had transpired, I realized that one person could make a difference. Standing up for what was right, even in the face of adversity, had been the catalyst for change. The question now was, what would others do with this knowledge? Would they stand by and watch as injustice unfolded? Or would they take a stand and fight for what was right? The choice was theirs, but one thing was certain. The power to create change lay within each individual. What would you do if you saw something wrong happening around you? Would you speak up, or would you stay silent? The decision was yours, but the consequences of your actions would be far-reaching. Thank you for listening to my story. If you like this kind of content, kindly leave us a like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories. Thank you.